How soon in the writing process will you know what your character wants?
Pretty early on, I will know generally what my character wants. Partly because it comes out of that obsession space. So if I'm dealing with some large theme that they are pursuing, then I will know, they want X. At the same time, I will rewrite my logline. I will write some material and I will come back to it. And I will say, do I really know? Do I really remember? Can I make it sharper? I'll do that quite a bit. But I think pretty early on, I have characters who come to mind who are headed for something pretty specific. And sometimes I just need to drill down on maybe what that looks like in this particular universe. But it comes pretty quickly.
Can you talk about character flaws and why every character has to have them?
Character flaws, I don't know, I think that's what makes characters fun and sweet and dear and interesting, is the way they stumble over themselves to do whatever it is they're trying to do. I think as a kid, I always felt like I would watch movies and be envious of the fact that this particular character knew what to say to that particular character. I'd be like, wow, what a great comeback. Like, I wish I was like that in real life, But I think I've come to really appreciate my own stumbling around. And I love to see that with characters on things that I watch, like sort of the haltingness or the mistakes or the, when a surgeon accidentally kills somebody on the table. Like, those are the moments, emotionally, dramatically, where I lean in and I want to know, I think, as a human question, how do we come back from those mistakes? How do we come back from, these things that people are not able to do when we assume incorrectly that we should be able to do everything? And so I feel like all of those things make characters seem more human and more real by having them be imperfect. So the question then becomes, for me, as I work on a character, like, what is the flavor of the imperfection of this particular character as opposed to that particular character? What is this character good at and what is that character not so good at? I'm really interested in that.
I think you mentioned about Tony Soprano that one of the reasons you really love watching him is he's in therapy, and he knows to some extent that his life is not working for him.
Yes, that really works for me. I'm not a fan of, and never have personally been a fan of, the anti-hero, because I feel like, probably has to do with my, growing up Catholic, and, there's always this sense of what's the moral imperative? Is there one? Like, what do we care about? What do we, where is there the space for trying to get it right? And what does it mean when we think we're not getting it right? And that doesn't necessarily obviously have to be in any sort of spiritual or religious context. But the notion of this guy who, to all intents and purposes is an anti-hero, but he's like, is this a good thing for me? Should I be like this with my family, with my career? Do I need to fix stuff? That, to me, that's really relatable. And I'd like to see that more in characters. I'm not, characters who just get away with murder and are really happy about it. I don't relate to those shows. And so I kind of step out of that because it doesn't feel real to me. But him going to therapy feels real to me.
Do you think having a character that feels guilt, it could be religious guilt, it could be just maybe they gave up a child or something that it's so fascinating to watch because we've all been there in some way or another? And
yeah, I think it is fascinating to watch because we've been there. It's also fascinating to watch because there's a certain swath of characters that don't go there. We've seen that for decades in movies and TV too. So the notion of the sort of in between, we so often in whatever it is, in our politics, in our fashion, whatever, is like do's and don'ts, rights and wrongs, and to see a character who lives in the middle, who's trying to navigate the middle and trying to say, well, maybe this part is good and maybe this part is not so good, that's fascinating to me.
How does a writer get inside the head of their character?
I think for me, getting inside the head of a character is, it's essentially an exercise in empathy, and it's an exercise, it feels very much connected to me to acting work. It's the notion of being able to sort of soak up the given circumstances and be able to say to myself, what would it feel like if I could do X or Y? Like, what's the intoxication of power if I'm the CEO of a company? And what would that do for me? And how would I relate to people? And what would I demand? And what would I expect from people who are around me? And what would I be disappointed about if people didn't behave that way? To go into the imaginative space, whether it's like meditative or journaling or, all sorts of things. And also connecting to the things, whatever the small pieces are in my life that relate to this character's life. Those are ways that I try to lean into it, and I think it's essential to be able to do that.
Of course it would be more difficult as a screenwriter versus writing prose as an author. Is it more just about show when you're a screenwriter, trying to show little tics, mannerisms that maybe are revealing what's inside the head of the character?
I think that's part of it. I also think it's, I'm really interested in languaging, like how things are spoken about, who's willing to say what and what are they not willing to say. So I think it's not only about what a character can demonstrate, but also what they're not willing to, where they're not willing to go. What is sort of left unsaid or left off the table. And the other thing I think too is for all of us is we can write it all through. We can always create a draft where the character says everything and does everything, and then go back in the rewrite and say, okay, now I'm going to take out 3 of these things and I'm going to have her say, two fewer or two, I'm going to take out 2 of the things she says. And we can build that way too and recognize that it's always it can be a work in progress for us to do that too.
You said that a lot of your job as a TV writer is thinking about emotions of your characters and how they would react to different situations. Can we talk more about this process, about pouring emotions into characters?
Yeah, I think for me, like so many of the things in my writing space, this sort of goes back to that imagination and being in the headspace of what has happened before. So quite often I feel like I'm the person in the writer's room or who's thinking about in my own work, okay, this betrayal just happened. How am I going to be when I see that person next? What am I going to say? Are we going to resolve that thing? Or are we going to skip over it? Am I going to push in? Am I going to be angry and defensive? Or am I going to be passive and sort of let go? And quite often I'm thinking in those terms of those kind of like, what's the emotional approach? What's the verbal approach? And what does that look like? And what would feel natural to me if I were in that circumstance? And I would imagine that the character is going to do his or her or their version of that. And that's kind of what I'm always looking for. That's always what I have questions about too, as we begin to talk about in the writer's room, those sorts of things. I'm usually the guy who says, wait a minute, last time they saw each other, this happened. Or doesn't she expect Y? Or doesn't she want retribution for Z? And how does that color how she shows up in this scene or in this episode?
So if we use our example of Joe again at this gas station buying these cigarettes, let's suppose what we don't know as the audience member yet, but we'll find out, is that he actually got downsized from his company. He's 50. He hasn't told his wife yet. He's going to work every day. And now this is day 4. And so we see a heaviness and he's smoking. I don't know where I'm going with this.
Yeah. No, I think that for me, then the question is when we see him with his wife, what's the order of operations? Is he going to pretend this day that he's still been going to work? Is this the day that he's going to tell her, and that's why he's buying the cigarettes? So the first thing that happens when he walks in, no matter what she says, is I quit my job and I haven't been there for 3 weeks and I couldn't tell you, and I have to tell you today. Is he going to not go home? Is he deciding that this is the day he just leaves and sends her a text like, can't do this anymore, and then disappears? Any of those things sort of infused with imagination becomes like a really juicy scene to write and to experience.